from the top of a hill or a mountaintop. From the cliff edge or standing in the midst of wide open prairies, you are able to look as far as you can possibly see. And there in the distance is the horizon, the far horizon. My name's David Woodall with the Emsdale Pastoral Charge of the United Church of Canada. The far horizon is a beautiful sight. To see that horizon moves anyone beyond where we're at to where we want to be. There is an inherent wandering lust to find out what lies beyond the next hill. And when you do that, you realize you're part of an amazing and vast world that's worth exploring and discovering. Seeing the big picture. These days, it's a bit of a tough thing to do. Often it's the immediate consequences that concern us, not the long-term effect of things. How does it go? You can't see the forest, the trees. 100 years ago, probably a little more, we introduced the gas-powered engine, and it revolutionized transportation around the world. Today, we're in the midst of a push to electric vehicles. Now, I don't see right now how we can survive without gas-powered vehicles. But I know these gas-powered vehicles are killing our environment. So I know we need to make this move. I just don't see how. Seeing the big picture. These days, that's a tough thing to do. Too often, it's the immediate consequences that concern us, not the long-term effects of things. Maybe for me, around gas-fired vehicles, I can't see the forest for the trees. Maybe I'm not standing high enough to see the horizon. Maybe I'm just locked into my own little world and not able to conceive of something new. The Hebrew people were finally home. Exiled in Babylon for 70 years, they had finally regained their freedom and returned to their homeland. But their land was in ruins. Their faith was just a vague memory. Most of them didn't speak their own language anymore. After a time of struggling around and rebuilding and settling back into their old homeland, they organized a gathering. And they gathered at a place called the Watergate because of the spring of water that was close by that location. And though the temple had been destroyed, this gate was one of the ancient entrances to the Temple Mount. It was on a hill. Standing on a hill is a good time to see the far horizons. They asked Ezra, one of their surviving priests, to read to them from the law of Moses. They needed translators because it was written in Hebrew and most of the people spoke the language of their captors, Aramaic. The story goes like this. All the people gathered together in the square before the Watergate. They told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given to Israel. Accordingly, Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, both men and women and all who could hear with understanding. This was on the first day of the 7th month. He read from it facing the square before the water gate from early morning until midday. In the presence of the men and women and those who could understand, in the ears of all the people, they were attentive to the book of the law. These people, you see, who had returned to rebuild their life, to rebuild their land, to rebuild their faith, knew that it was the time to come together. In the midst of all the details of returning, creating shelters, rebuilding towns and cities, rebuilding the temple, rebuilding their very identity as a people, they knew they had to lift their vision from the trees to see the forest, to see the far horizons, to once again claim their life as a people. It was no coincidence. You see, they gathered on a hill. And it's from this time we see the emergence of a written accounting of all the stories of people of God who had encountered God through their lives. Over time, it became the Jewish scriptures, what we call the Old Testament. It was a time of looking to the far horizons. There is something about gathering together which has something to do with rebuilding our lives. We're so much better when we work together and not against each other. Like those early refugees gathering on a hilltop. They could look beyond all the land and the water and to see each other standing there on that hillside, gazing out. They heard and they saw the enticing vision of what just lies beyond. Sometimes, in our gatherings, in those hilltops, faith is found. Seeing the far horizons helps us to keep our life in perspective. It gives us a way of moving through the present and into the future. That is what those Israelite people were doing on the day that they gathered at the Watergate. Hundreds of years later, there was a boy who grew up in Nazareth and climbed the hills around that community. William Barclay tells us that Nazareth was not a village. It was called a polis, which means a town or city, and it may have had as many as 20,000 inhabitants. It stood in a little hollow in the hills on the lower slopes of Galilee near the plain of Jezreel, but a boy had only to climb to the hilltop above the town, and he could see an amazing panorama for miles around. And when that boy did so, that boy from the town of Nazareth, he could see the history of Israel stretching out. There was the plain where Deborah and Barak had fought, where Gideon had won his victories, where Saul had crashed to disaster. There was Mount Carmel, where Elijah had fought his epic battle with the prophets of Baal, and blue in the distance. There was the Mediterranean and the Isles of the Sea. At that time, world history unfolded itself from that hilltop above Nazareth. There were three great roads that lay on each side of it. There was the road from the south carrying pilgrims to Jerusalem. There was the great way of the sea, which led from Egypt to Damascus, with laden caravans moving along it. There was the great road to the east, bearing caravans from Arabia and Roman legions marching out to the eastern frontiers of the empire. You see, it's wrong to think of the boy Jesus growing up in a backwater. He was brought up in a town in sight of history, with the traffic of the world almost at its doors. It's the scene from the hilltop that gives our lives perspective. Faith encourages us to lift up our eyes. We gain a perspective, a way of understanding life when the far horizons become our home. This Jesus who came out of Galilee preached and taught for 3 years, and continually again and again he called his disciples, his followers to the hilltops. He spoke to the people from the side of a mountain. On another mountain with three of his disciples, he was suddenly changed before them, and Moses and Elijah were talking to him. And at the end, he was raised up on a hill called Golgotha. And then afterwards, his body was placed in the side of a hill, where everyone thought it was the end. It was a simple message Jesus brought. Look up from the preoccupations of survival and see a world where each man and woman and child can live with dignity and love, where we can all live in peace, where no one goes hungry and all have homes, where each of us knows God and seeks the best for each other. Jesus put it this way the very first time he spoke in the temple to the people he had grown up with. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has chosen me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, and announce that the time has come when the Lord will save his people." My friends and my neighbors, we sit in the valleys and we rummage around in the ruts of life. We wake up in the morning with a sore back, worked the day before until we could work no more, then dropped exhausted into bed. We cursed the car the morning it wouldn't start and neglected to include that extra bit of money on the income tax form. We're sometimes blind to things. We go through our lives, accomplish our goal, and at the end, we find we're still empty. The things we thought were important lose their value and disappear. Our paychecks decrease in value or disappear. Our friends and our neighbors experience hardships, and we wonder how much longer can we carry on. Those words beckoning us to the far horizon whisper through our souls, "He's chosen me to bring good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed, and to announce that time has come. It is time for us to hike to the top of the mountain or the cliff or the hillside or into the wide open prairie. If you want to be truly free, then go and be with those in prison. If you want to truly be alive, then go and be with those who are dying. If you want to be everything you can possibly be, then give your whole self away to someone else, and you will find that you have far more than you ever dreamed possible. If you try to save your life, you'll just lose it. But if you lose your life, then you'll find it, and so much more. There is a longing and a hope that permeates our world. It resides deep within our humanity. A longing and a hope for peace, and for justice, and for homes, and for food, and for clothing, for each person to find and fulfill their potential. The captives can go free. The blind can see, even if you're the blind one. Maybe we can even reverse the climate damage we have done. You can see the far horizons from a hill, from a mountaintop, from the cliff edge, in the midst of the wide open prairies. I wonder if, from some mountainside, Christ was able to look from his vantage point down through the centuries and see you and me, and know that we would be the heirs of that vision, which he spoke of in the synagogue that day. I wonder if he smiled, because he knew that the vision would be safe with us. Because even in the midst of our lives, which are sometimes good and sometimes painful, we would never, never let our world just become ourselves, just the valley we live in. That continually, again and again, we would venture to the hilltop and look out across the landscapes of life and see the places of history and be at the crossroads of the world, that we would build and rebuild, and we would continue to seek for justice and for hope. The vision is safe with us. Thank God.